If you want to participate, contact me at ordinarywomenpodcast@gmail.com. I'm sure you have great projects to brag about. You can also follow me and message me on Instagram at ordinarywomenpodcast, on Twitter at ordinarywomenpc, or on Facebook on the page Ordinary Women. Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Ordinary Women. I'm welcoming Yennie today. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for being here. I'm really excited to have you here today. Can you start by giving us a quick introduction of yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Yennie Rautenberg-Loya, and I am an executive leadership coach. I live in San Diego, California, and I'm originally from Mexico City. So I have been in the US since 2000.
Nice. How are you liking it over there?
I am enjoying. I have been in California for it's gonna be 15, 16 years now. When I first arrived to the US, I went to South Florida, which I spent there 7 years, and there was great, hot, warm, humid. Here in California is a little bit colder, and as I was mentioning to you, this winter seems to be a little bit longer, very, very wet with a lot of rain, which is something that we're not very used to. So we're just eager to have some sunny and blue skies arriving soon, hopefully.
Nice. I really hope for you. And can you tell us something unusual about you?
Well, yeah, one thing unusual that some people get surprised about is that I am Mexican, that I am Latina because of my last name, right? My last name is Rautenberg, which is a German last name. And when I became a citizen, I hyphenated with my mom's last name, which is, it's like in Mexico, we normally go with both last names, right? So the father and the mom's last name. So when I became a citizen, I hyphenated both last names so I could bring a little bit of my Latinness into my name. But most people assume that my last name Rautenberg comes from like my married last name or something like that. But no, it's actually Mexican. I'm actually from Mexico, and that's my original name given at birth.
Yeah, that's your full name and part of your identity and not only your husband, I guess.
Right. Yeah. And I'm even married, so
right.
so that is my name. That's what I was given when I was born.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. That's so interesting. Also, really interesting that people would automatically assume that A, you're married, B, you took your husband's name.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why? Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope it at least sparks conversation around your origins and like the word identity. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting for me, of course, because I have grown up with this identity. It was never like a big deal, right? Like it's not something that I would talk about. I don't know, up until a few years ago, I started to realize that probably my identity is more. People get more curious about it than what I would assume. There is a big German community in Mexico. And I grew up in a Mexican German family, and my grandfather was originally from Germany, and he was a sailor, and he stayed in Mexico after World War II. So my grandmother met him, and they got married, and my dad was born with two other sisters. And my other side, from my mom's side, which also I think is interesting, is that my grandfather of an indigenous community called the Tarahumaras, which they are very famous. They are also called Raramuris, which is this indigenous people that run ultra marathons. I don't know if you have heard of them.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so
That's really interesting.
It is. They have the community itself. This group has been very visible because they tend to run ultra marathons and do actually win like gold medals and stuff. And one of the things that distinguishes them is that they run bare feet or with their sandals, so they don't use sneakers or running shoes. And I don't know if men, but women tend to run with their ethnic clothes. So it's a quite interesting, like a fact about this community. So grandfather, he was not the runner, but he was part of that community.
That is so interesting. I'll definitely go look for more information about that because that's really interesting. And I'll put it in the show notes if anyone else is interested.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
There's actually, sorry to interrupt you. There's actually a book. It's called Born to Run, and it's about the story of this community. So that can be also a reference for your listeners.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. I'll definitely, include that and have a look myself. Thank you so much. And speaking of identity, and a question that I always ask at the beginning, because obviously here we talk a lot about what it's like to be a woman. Was there a moment or an event in your life when you realized that you are a woman?
That's an interesting question. I don't. Probably when I was little, this idea of protecting myself, right? That's as a girl or as a woman to not let anyone touch me or like more from an inappropriate behavior perspective. So I remember my mom would tell me things like, you need to be careful, don't talk to strangers. I think that people do that with kids, regardless of gender. But I remember that it was very specific to, because you're a girl, you are more exposed or you are more in danger. That's kind of the memory that I have about it. But honestly, I tried to do my life with pretty much freedom, and it was not that it was a big concern, right? But or something that I was constantly aware of. It was kind of ingrained in me, and probably most of my behaviors was within that framework that I am a girl and I need to take care of that, right? So that is what I can say about that. As I grew up, in terms of I don't know, like what women can do or what is accepted or not in society, I had strong female figures around me. So this idea of, because you're a woman, you can or cannot do certain things, was not from a professional perspective, was not a concern for me. I mean, my mom has always, her entire life, and still she is now, she has been a very active, hard worker, independent, with more of an entrepreneurial spirit, very resilient, funny, lively. That's the Mexican part of it, right? Like what it's stereotyped as the Mexican part of it. And I remember she was always working. She was always looking at ways to, to keep herself active, but also to be productive. My parents were together for many years, up until I was a teenager. So my dad would work, she would work. So it was kind of a working family, both. And it was normal, right? And she would take me with her when she would go and do her things or sales or see clients. So very early, I learned that I got this working habit, right? Like very, very early.
Right.
On my dad's side, he had two sisters. One of them, she was more of, she still is, like an academic. She has a doctorate degree in education. She has always been also very active. In the 60s, she was part of some movements that happened in Mexico with students. And so she has always been very active in society. And she actually just finished her doctorate degree probably a couple of years ago. So also, like, studying, learning, being prepared was part of the context that I grew up in. And I went to the German school too, right? So that was another aspect of discipline and structure, and get certain values about development and about ethics, etc. was part of my upbringing. The other person and she has been very influential in my life as well, is the other sister of my dad, and She worked in a corporate environment. She was an executive assistant, and she would go to the office. She would bring me to the office sometimes. So from her, I also learned that aspect of being part of a corporate culture, following certain rules about what it is like to work in corporate, and following certain rules and behaviors and structures. So these three people have been very influential as women, right, in my life. And I still believe the three of them are still alive, and I still admire and learn from them.
They all sound amazing. And yeah, it sounds like you've really got a lot of different values and you can kind of like mix them all and take what you like.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it was it's been, I mean, I can say it, I mean, I have had a very privileged life. When I was living in Mexico, we were, as I said, the middle class working family, but I had a chance to go to private school. We were not rich by any means of imagination, but we lived a good life, right? So we were able to do a little bit of travel here and there. And what's interesting about this, and I think it's addressing this thing about identity, is that if you look at me, I don't look like what it's traditionally seen as a German person, right? Like my stature is not high. My skin is not totally white, and my eyes are brown. So when I was going to school, I never felt German enough. So, and even in the school, they would separate kids of those who were like their mothers were from German or from German descent, and the groups that were not that German, I guess. So,
Right.
so it was more like if you speak German at home, you were put in one group, and if you don't, we were put in another group. So I was not German enough to be in the German group. So that was like, okay, I'm not that German, right? So I felt a little bit like I'm not sure if I quite belong in this place. And then I would go, play with my friends in the neighborhood or my cousins and like the people in my mom's family. And they were Mexican, but they would kind of, looking back today, that would be considered probably bullying. But, they would make fun of me that I was all disciplined, that I had my colors like all in order, and that I was very disciplined because that's what I was learning at school, right? And so I was not Mexican enough when I was interacting with them. So I learned very early to navigate these two worlds of look, like I'm half German, half Mexican, but I don't really belong in any of those places fully. So looking into what's my place, what's my voice, where do I belong, how can I navigate from one place to the other, has been something that it's been part of my journey since I was very little, since I remember.
Yeah, it must be almost stabilizing as a child not to feel fully part of a group.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I guess it's always that double. I don't know how you say that in English. I only know in French, but like that double side, two sides of the coin. I don't know. Like it's obviously amazing, and especially I'm sure that you see that as an adult, like the having both cultures, and yeah, it's also an amazing thing. But yeah, I'm sure as well that for like coming back to identity, yeah, it must have been tough sometimes.
Yeah, it was it created an that experience that sometimes is like, okay, I'm not quite sure. I would say maybe a little bit of uncertainty, right? Like I'm not quite sure where I belong and where to go. And sometimes still as an adult today, I'm like, okay, I kind of don't feel part of any of these groups, right? So it's something that I have been, working on, experiencing. And actually as a coach, I do a lot of work with people about that, about how to build a sense of belonging, how to find your own place. A lot of times we think that having this sense of belonging is by the environment, which is true, right? It needs to be there, but also having a sense of belonging comes from within. And if you cannot feel that you fit in your own self, right? If you don't belong within, it's very hard to belong anywhere. So I think it's important work that we all need to do, because I think that my story is a little bit a good example of the two extremes, right? So, and this is also going with stereotypes, like what we consider about the German culture and what we consider about the Mexican culture. But I think that as we grow up, any human being has to navigate things like that, has to navigate extremes, or has to navigate going from one place to the other, finding our own voice. So I have done a lot of work around that, and I am always super proud of the work that I do with people that I coach on how to find their own space, their own voice, their own presence, and also build that confidence that so many people are craving, and a lot of people don't know where to even start to build that.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting topic. And yeah, I'm sure that it's so interesting to see people navigate that and overcome that as well. Thank you so much for sharing.
Mhm.
And do you think that the lack of representation of women in society had an impact on you?
Um, I I don't know, because it was not like a conscious thing for me, right? Like, oh, because there are not that many women here, or because women are not represented there, it wasn't something that was conscious about. As I mentioned, I had good female role models in my life that showed me that it really could be anything that you could, right? From working in a corporate environment, being an entrepreneur with my mom, or being an academic, and follow that educational path. So I never had concerns about, because like there is a lack of representation of women, and therefore I need to do something, or I don't have to do anything, or it was not part of my mindset, I guess. It became part of my mindset as I, grew older, and as I came to the US, and saw some of the things that happened here, like a gap, and things like that, that I started to be more conscious. But it was more as an adult that I realized that it wasn't necessarily something that a concern that I grew up with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing. And I'd like to jump on kind of the second part of this podcast and hear about a project or achievement or life experience that you've done or are doing and are proud of. So, what do you want to talk to us about today?
Yeah, so a little broad, because I think that it's just about my life. But so it's not a specific project itself, but it's rather the project of my life.
Mhm.
So one of the things is of course what I share with you about my upbringing and the bicultural mindset, and all of that influenced a lot in who I am today. Um,
Yeah.
and a series of other things also made me a very independent person, very independent woman, like, and this is kind of the way that I would like to tell this as a project. It has been, again, a long project of my life. But
Yeah.
I left home, which is something that back in the 90s was not common in Mexico.
Mhm.
So I started to work, to live independently. I started working very early. I started working when I was 18. And by my early 20s, I decided that it was time for me to look for my own place, to get independent. I had a good job, so I left home. And that was something that at that time was not usual. Some family members were not very happy with with that.
Mhm.
But I just did that. That was in my early 20s. So towards the end of my 20s is when I decided to come to the US, which also was, an important move for me
Yeah.
to look for a better life. I came first to South Florida as a transfer of a job I had in Mexico. So like I want to go to the US, and this company happened to just had opened an office in South Florida. So I decided, like, okay, this is my opportunity. I'm going there. And I moved there without really knowing anyone. And I had great experiences, and I loved those 7 years that I was in South Florida. This was in the early 2000s. And some people might remember that back then, it's when all the .com boom happened, right? So it's when all kinds of internet companies started to exist. And South Florida was kind of the hub for the rest of Latin America. So I had great opportunities to work with startups, with established companies, with, mostly in tech. Most of the companies I've worked with are in the tech industry. And yeah, it was an exciting time, like everything about the internet was new and exciting, and a lot of companies were rising. And so I really enjoyed that time. And then in my close to late 30s, I decided to move to, no, it was like my mid 30s. I decided to move to California, to San Diego. I was working with a client, big telecom company that their headquarters are here in San Diego. And for my client when I was in Florida, and they invited me to join the company. So I moved to San Diego, and I worked for them for 11 years. And it was in corporate communication, so nothing to do with what I'm doing today. And I had great experiences, travel around the world. I was in charge of the corporate communications programs for pretty much all the developing countries. So I got to travel to, different countries in Latin America and Southeast Asia and India, and it was super exciting. And then in 2018, the company had a big restructuring, and I was laid off with other few thousands of people. So at that point, I decided that I wanted to switch careers and do more work that could have a direct impact in people. And I had done some training and coaching and trainings. I was teaching seminars and things like that as a hobby before that. So I had about 10 years of experience there. And I always loved it. But, in the early 2000s, being a coach was a weird thing. Like nobody would talk about
Yeah.
that. So I didn't see that as an opportunity of a career. And then when I was laid off, I was like, okay, this is it. I'm going to go and do what I love and pursue my passion. And I decided to become an entrepreneur, which I had never done. I had a good example of my mom. I was never, I always thought that I wanted to have just my check, and I have that security.
Yeah.
But, I decided to pursue this, and I got some, trainings in different aspects and different things. And I have been successful since then. So that is kind of the biggest project that I've done. I started my company 5 years ago. I have been growing consistently. And what I have done is incorporate into the services and the things that I do, incorporate pretty much all of my experiences, right? From being an immigrant, from being a woman working in tech, this into independence sometimes. So how to modulate and how to be a little bit more balanced, I guess, which has been part of my story. So a lot of the things that I do today are very authentic to who I am and very aligned with the things that I have experienced, but also the things that I care for. So yeah, that's my project. And one of the things that I always speak with the people that I coach is the importance of being aligned between the things that you care for and your passions and your skills, of course, the strengths that you bring to the table, but also your values, right? Like, what do you care for? What is important for you? And how your job can become an expression of that. A lot of times we don't think that way. It's more like, okay, this is a job. And I was actually coaching someone this morning, and we were talking about toxic cultures, and saying like, well, I'm in this place where it's a toxic culture and I'm not even being paid well, right? So at least if I was being paid well, I could handle the toxic culture. And I was telling like, no, why? You can have both, right? Like you can have a good paying job and be in an environment that it's nurturing and fulfilling and it's aligned with the things that you care for. But a lot of times we just, scared, obviously, because we need to eat, we need money to live. But a lot of times we put up with a lot of things that are just not in alignment what we are and what we care for. And that starts to become, I would say, maybe like a downward spiral that you start to disconnect yourself from who you are. And there's so many people unhappy at their jobs, or people dealing with, depression or anxiety. And I'm not saying that is the cause of it, right? But it contributes. Like if you are not happy in what you do, 8 hours a day, well, probably something that you need to look at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. Completely. Work has such a big impact on us. That makes so much sense. Yeah, it is so interesting. So what challenges have you faced so far in doing this? Or like in your life? I guess there's so many, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Answer this however you want.
Well, one of the biggest challenge, I think, is to do the business of the business, like to do the business, right? Which is, learning how to run a business, like all the legal aspects of it and the compliances. And, I studied bookkeeping and stuff when I was in school, but kind of very different to study it than to actually apply it to your business. And how do you sell? What do you sell? Like all this, the aspects of the business have been challenging. I normally try to, and this is part of the work that I do too, is to reframe situations in a way that they are more empowering and that they are more exciting than not. And that also comes from my background in communications, right? When I was doing media trainings with executives, one of the rules was you never say a challenge, you never say a problem, you always present it as opportunities. So those challenges about building a business and how to establish it and how to find clients and how to put together proposals and how much to charge and all these things, they have been things that I didn't know before and that I have learned in the last 5 years. And sometimes you learn through messing it up, right? So
yeah.
And I think it's as you said, the two sides of the coin. There are challenges and there are things that you need maybe to figure out how to do it. And sometimes it doesn't look very pretty, or sometimes you might lose money, but then if you use those situations to learn from them and to do it better next time, I think it's a good combination, right? Like how to take things in life from a challenging situation and turn it into a learning opportunity.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And as you were saying, you can't learn how to do something properly until you've actually done it. So as good as I'm sure your accounting classes and stuff were, until you're actually in the business, it's never the same.
Yeah. And also some of the things that have been interesting is there are certain concepts or certain ideas or even strategies that are taught, right? Or that you remember, like in marketing, is like, oh, you need to find your niche, right? The first thing that you need to do is find your niche. And I was like, okay, so I want everyone to have this. Like, I don't want to create a niche because then so many people that I'm not going to be talking to, right? So I was very resistant about what is my niche. And I was able to figure out what is my niche, but it wasn't the first thing I figured out or that I was able to do, because I was just starting to learn about what I was doing, how to run a business, but also what kind of people I want to work with, right? And particularly because this work is a service, right? And it's very personal. But little by little, my audience started to, I started to attract the audience that ended up being my niche, right? Which is underrepresented groups or minority groups, women in professional settings in corporate, mostly Latinos and Latinas, and how to navigate corporate cultures and corporate policies. But that it was not that when I first started my business, I was like, okay, this is going to be my niche. I had to go through it and to figure it out. So it became a natural audience and I didn't have to settle for something at the beginning. I don't know if this makes sense. Is this making sense?
Yeah, no, yeah, completely. Like it was up to you to create everything the way you wanted it to be rather than having to follow someone and compromise on things. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, it's a little bit of that, and it's something that, a lot of times we want to do things by the book, right? So it's like, okay, you
Yeah.
first need to find your niche, and sometimes it doesn't work that way. Like
Yeah.
maybe for some people, for some businesses, it's key to find their niche first to be able to do the rest of it. But having to navigate, I guess that what the point that I'm trying to make is one of the challenges was to navigate these best practices that exist in the industry and figure out which parts of it are applicable for my company and for what I do, and which things they just don't apply, right?
Yeah.
So to be smart and selective about these best practices, what are the things that I need today for my business, and not approaching things as this is a recipe that you need to do one and then the other and then the other. And I think that sometimes there is that expectation that you should apply things particular order, and I don't think that life goes that way.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, that makes so much sense. I definitely agree. Thank you for sharing this. And was there anything on the contrary that you thought was easier than you originally thought you would have been?
Yeah, one thing might sound a little, I don't know if it sounds strange or not, but one thing that I was and continue to be surprised and very grateful for is how, I don't want it to sound like presumptuous, but how good I can be. I'm working with people. And I'm not doing this from a like, oh, look at me, like cocky way, right? But it's more about, I was surprised to do what I do and that it came out so naturally.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's also good to be able to recognize your strength and, yeah, I don't think it's bragging. And I love that you're saying that. So, yeah, take credit for being good at what you're being good at.
Yeah, right. So interestingly, and sometimes we teach things and we forget about them. So I am certified. There's this training, you might have heard of it, called I Am Remarkable. And
Yeah.
have you heard of it?
Yeah.
I am a certified facilitator, right? So I do give this training of I Am Remarkable. And one of my favorite quotes there is that it is not bragging if it's based on facts.
Yeah.
Right? So it's to really, the entire training is aimed to change this perception about, modesty and not talking about our own accomplishments or the things that we're good at. And it does feel a little strange, but if it's not us talking about our own strengths and accomplishments, else will, right? So
Yeah, completely.
yeah, I totally, from time to time, it doesn't feel that comfortable to say it, but I guess it's part of the work that we're doing. So
Completely. Yeah, I love that workshop for that and how it teaches you to, like, all the bias that we have integrated and how, yeah, it's something that you learn to do. And even though it doesn't come naturally, it's really important to do it. So, yeah, I'm glad that you're doing it and taking, I can't find the word in English, like taking credit for what you're good at. That's
yeah,
really cool.
yeah. I'm thinking about, it's interesting that we're having this conversation in English, and it seems like for neither of us, English is our first language, right?
Yeah, completely.
So
That's also why I love languages.
yeah, and I mean, for me, my first language was Spanish, of course, but my second language was German. And then I had such a hard time learning English when I was in school. And I was very afraid when I first arrived to the US. Well, before that, obviously, but when I first started to work in the US, I didn't want to speak in English because I was so afraid that people would make fun of me because I had an experience younger, right? That I said
Yeah.
like word that I didn't pronounce well, and kids made fun of me. But it takes so much, and still to this day, I work with people that the fact that they don't speak, or that they speak English with an accent, or any language that they work on, right? That they're working
Yeah.
with a language with an accent, people are very self-conscious about it. And on the other hand, is like, we're speaking a lot of other languages that we like. It's so hard to learn language, so we should be proud of that as well, even if we don't speak it like 100% well.
Completely. Whenever someone like makes a jokes about like when an English person, especially and especially since a lot of British people don't speak another language, I love to ask them if they want to switch language, because it's like quick reminder, this is not my mother tongue. Still, we're having a full-on conversation. You're mocking me about the tiniest bit of accent. You wouldn't be able to do that in any other language because you only speak one. Yeah, completely. And also, a friend of mine reminded me a while ago that it actually is a lot easier for the listener to adapt to what they're listening than to the speaker to adapt their speech. And yeah, you end up losing a lot less when the listener adapts to the accent. And also, be kind. Like,
Yeah, and I'm happy that culture is starting to change. I think a little bit.
yeah,
Um,
completely.
right? Like, I mean, a few years ago, well, not few, but maybe like 50 years ago, here in the US, there were, or maybe it's more than that, but like people couldn't speak Spanish, for example, right? And people were discriminated against if they were speaking in Spanish. There are still cases here that if people hear you on the street or in a store speaking in Spanish, they might attack you or say something. But it's becoming more accepted, the diversity that exists, and particularly, I mean, I was going to say in the US, but I think it's really about different parts of the world because it's in Europe, it's even in Mexico. You can so much immigration going on around the world that really like everything is merging into a big pot of cultures and languages, and instead of being upset about it, it's such a great opportunity to learn, right, from and connect with people that are not from our same background, and learn about other cultures, etc. So I think it's an exciting time with all the challenges that are on the other side, that they exist. Of course, we cannot deny them.
Yeah, completely. I think that's, yeah, so well summarized. Definitely. And why are you proud of this?
Um, of my journey
Of your journey.
project. Yeah, well, one thing about being an entrepreneur and a business owner, one is that I never thought that I would do it. So doing it is like an accomplishment in itself, and I am proud that I have as or I am in the fifth year of the business, and it has been successful and it has been growing, which sometimes a lot of companies or new businesses don't even get to the third year. So I'm proud of having navigated this to this point, and I really look forward to continue growing and succeeding and bringing value to people and to companies. One thing that it's a statistic that it's out there is about the fast rate that new businesses owned by Latinas in the U.S. is growing. We are the fastest cohort of entrepreneurs in the U.S. So every day there's more and more businesses being built by Latinas in the US, which is great. And actually, the overall impact of Hispanic owned businesses in the US has contributed like billions of dollars, right, to the American economy. So I am proud to represent Latinos in a professional environment, in a industry and an aspect outside of the stereotypes, right? Because you already know this, but in the US, normally Latinos or Hispanos are seen as with a lot of stereotypical roles in society, like the person in the kitchen in a restaurant, or the person who does the gardening, but not necessarily professionals. And that it's such a big community, and we are really everywhere. And there's a lot of statistics that show that in the future, I mean, right now, the Hispanic community in the US is the biggest minority in the US. But now it's about changing the perception that we are just in lower paying jobs. And it's like we can be in professional settings, we can be in senior leadership, we can be CEOs of companies. And I think what I'm proud about is that I'm part of that, I call it movement, but also that I am helping other people to also develop their own leadership and to get up the ladder if that is what they are looking for, right, in the corporate world. So that was a long answer. But
No, but that was so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think we're going to conclude our episode on this. Thank you so much. Everything that you said was so, insightful and interesting.
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Before we end, is there anything that we didn't talk about during our discussion that you wanted to mention now?
Yeah, one thing that I would say is invite all your audience to consider working with an executive coach. If you're in a professional setting with an executive coach or a leadership coach, if you're in a personal, from a personal perspective with a life coach, just make sure that they are reputable and good coaches, because, the benefits of working with a coach are great, from increasing self-esteem and confidence to improving performance, relationships, communications, etc. So it's a great tool that not a lot of people are aware of. So invite people to look into that. And I also invite companies to look into how they can support their employees by providing coaching opportunities. So that has also great benefits for companies. And I, as a coach, someone in the industry, I would love for coaches to be more seen as an additional tool for talent development inside of companies.
Definitely. And I'll add anything that where people can find you in the show notes. So if anyone is interested, they can reach to you.
Yeah, or there's the International Coaching Federation as well. So if people want to learn more about coaching and what it is, I'm more than happy to give them that information and to have a chat with anyone. But also, if people want to do their own research, the International Coaching Federation is a good resource. And there's even a directory of coaches there that people can reach out to. But I'm also happy to work with more people. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. I'll list everything in the show notes so that people can, have a look at all of these resources. Thank you so much again for your time and for sharing bits of your story with us. Yeah, it was so interesting. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And I look forward to continue in contact with you,
Yeah, definitely. And there is a tradition on this podcast that the guest gets the very last word. So the mic is yours.
Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. But to all your audience, I always like to end my emails with this sentence: have a successful and fulfilling rest of your day. And thank you for your attention.